In today's video, we're exploring some NHL trade rumors that could see a trade between the Maple Leafs and Flames, as well as the Canucks and the Boston Bruins. We also have some updates on the NHL waiver wire and some roster updates concerning the Maple Leafs and the Habs as well. We'll discuss all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of things to cover today. I want to kick things off with a quick update from the NHL waiver wire. Yesterday, we mentioned that Scott Sabourin had been signed to a one-year, two-way deal by the Maple Leafs. He did require waivers to be put on the NHL roster or taxi squad, so he has cleared. So now he is officially a part of the Leafs on a two-way contract. No waiver claims were made, and I wasn't aware of any other news from the waiver wire here as of today. Now, sticking with the Leafs, another quick update. We had talked about the Wayne Simmonds injury yesterday, indicating he could be out upwards of around 6 weeks. The Maple Leafs finally released a confirmation of that today. It looks as though it will be at least 6 weeks. It could even be a little bit longer. He's been diagnosed with a broken wrist. So obviously, many of us felt or were thinking it was more of a hand injury, but it's indeed a wrist injury. So of course, with a shortened season, 6 weeks is going to be a lot of games. It said minimum 6 weeks, so it could be a little bit more depending on how he heals up. So as I mentioned, it's a big loss for Toronto. Of course, that's kind of what accelerated the Scott Sabourin signing. He's not going to give you what Wayne Simmonds gives you, but he will give you the grit and the toughness. So we'll see if he gets into the lineup at all. I know they've had Nick Virtanen the last game. Looks like he might play another game as well. Joe Thornton, Nick Robertson are still out for a little while as well. And of course, we're going to talk about a potential trade that we might see between Toronto and Calgary. And I can't help but wonder if the injury situation they're facing might possibly accelerate a deal, but it's going to depend on the asking price, and that's obviously something we'll talk about here momentarily. Now, a couple of quick updates on the Montreal Canadiens and some roster moves. They've now sent Ryan Poehling and Cale Fleury, a couple of their young top prospects who were on the taxi squad, have been officially moved down to the American Hockey League. Now, of course, the American Hockey League is getting started up here. They will soon be playing American Hockey League games in that Canadian division that they're going to have as well. So clearly, that's just an opportunity to get them more ice time instead of sitting with the taxi squad and being very limited to what they're able to do. I'm sure at some point this season they're likely going to get an opportunity, at least you would think. A lot of that's probably going to depend on injuries. Right now, the Habs are in pretty decent shape that way. They don't have a lot that they're dealing with in that regard, so and they're winning. Obviously, when teams are being successful near the top of the division, battling for a playoff spot, you're a little bit less likely to work your prospects in. A team like Ottawa, for example, got off to a rough start. They have a lot of prospects. They're in a different situation, so they're trying to rotate guys through and get them some reps here to see what they have long term. But when you're at the top of the standings, things are a little different. So it's important for those guys to play, and they'll head down to the AHL for now to see if they can get some more reps on the ice to stay sharp for when they get their next NHL opportunity. Now, we also had word today that the NHL had to reschedule more games because of COVID-related issues. Of course, this all stems from the issues that are facing teams like the Wild, Devils, and Sabres right now. I know the Wild are a team that I know Bill Guerin mentioned that it's kind of going right through the team. There was talk that they might be able to reopen a practice facility as early as Wednesday, but that seems less likely now, given that they had to add even more players to the COVID list today. So certainly not a good situation there. Those teams have been hit pretty hard, and there's a lot of positive cases, a lot of people isolating right now because of what's happened and transpired there. So we'll obviously keep them in our thoughts and hope for speedy recoveries, and hopefully they can move past this. I know the NHL is starting to experiment with more rapid testing, and they're certainly going to continue to tweak these protocols to try to keep not only the players as healthy and safe as possible, but to try to get through as many of these games as possible, that they can hopefully at least come close to completing their 56-game schedule. They may not be able to do that. We may end up going into the playoffs based on a point percentage model, which we'll have to see here, depending on how everything goes throughout the next couple of months. As I mentioned as well, could we see a couple of trades or maybe even more involving our Canadian teams in the North Division? Now, for the most part, a lot of the rumors we've been hearing involve the Canadian teams swapping with each other due to the difficult quarantine rules that would involve players, crossing the U.S.-Canada border by trade. But obviously, one of the trade rumors we're going to talk about today does involve the Canucks and the Boston Bruins. We know the Vancouver Canucks have gotten off to a fairly miserable start here. It's really difficult to say what exactly has happened in Vancouver. You can see the pressure is mounting. The frustration is starting to boil over. You can kind of say that the defensive play has been poor. Offensively, they seem to be lacking confidence. It just seems to be there's a lot of disjointness. I don't know how to describe Vancouver's situation, really. It's kind of weird. I mean, you even got guys like JT Miller, who was an absolute, the heartbeat of that team last year, just doesn't seem to be putting a full effort in, especially on the two-way side of the game. There's been a few situations now on the back check where he's just hasn't had the effort there, which resulted in goals against. You can see the frustration kind of starting to boil over, even a little bit between teammates, it seems. So, you know what? It's hard to say what's going to happen there. You get Travis Green on an expiring contract. Jim Benning, as a GM, was under contract for a couple more seasons, but the pressure's certainly on him where he's made a lot of these decisions that have put them in cap trouble and a lot of overspending on bottom six forwards and all of that. So it's hard to say what direction we see for change, but there's a lot of people that feel that the most likely scenario we're going to see here is a Jake Virtanen trade sooner than later. Now, of course, Virtanen's been a player who's been, really a love-hate relationship with the Vancouver Canucks fans and by looks of it, the organization as well over the last number of years since he's been drafted. A player who they've really spent a lot of time developing that I know head coach Travis Green knows very well from the time in the minors to the time in the NHL. But it just seems like a fresh start and some new scenery might be best for him. And it might be what the team needs in order to get somebody new to come in just to shake things up, just to show that, we're trying to see what we can do here to get this team back on track. Now, one of the rumors we came across was through Boston Hockey Now and Pittsburgh Hockey Now, where Jimmy Murphy, who mostly covers the Boston Bruins, talking about the fact that the Canucks and the Bruins were believed to have had some trade discussions earlier, and he's thinking based on his sources that they could be having some discussions here yet again. The discussions before were around the Bruins showing interest in Jake Virtanen, and he has some sources wondering if the Bruins would be willing to include Jake Debrusk in a potential swap of forwards. Now, they're not saying it would be a one-for-one deal if they did go down that road, but it's a situation where both players have been mentioned a lot in rumors about being traded, and they wonder if it's something that Boston would do. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say probably not. I mean, I'm not saying that they're opposed to trading Jake Debrusk for the right price, but not straight up for Jake Virtanen. It's going to take a lot more than Jake Virtanen to get him to be able to be moved. I mean, Virtanen is less established than Debrusk, and even though he's been, in the NHL a little bit longer, Debrusk has proven to be the stronger player of the two, more consistent. Even though he's had his own consistency issues, I wouldn't do that trade. Now, if there was something more in the package, and it was more than just Virtanen coming back, maybe, but at the end of the day here, the Boston Bruins are a team that's been playing very well lately. They've been the comeback kids, coming back a lot. Debrusk, yes, you can say what you want about him. Maybe they do trade him at some point. Difficult to say. I'm just not convinced that he's going to a Canadian team for starters. Maybe without Virtanen for a period of time while he goes to his isolation period, have to get a work visa. It would, they'd be a couple of weeks getting him into their lineup. So that would kind of, slow things down on a team that's been playing very well right now. And I'm just not sure that I'd see that trade happening. Now, I'm not surprised to see a team like Boston have interest in Virtanen. There's been a lot of talk about Boston dating back to the offseason about adding another, probably like a top 9 forward. Doesn't have to be a top 6. Preferably if it's somebody who can play top 6 consistently, then it gives them more flexibility with line 3 as well. And they could have guys like Debrusk and Craig Smith kind of playing in that third line consistently if they had somebody stronger who could play up in the lineup a little bit more. I'm just not sure that Jake Virtanen is that player, but apparently they had discussions before. It's also being reported that teams like New Jersey, Pittsburgh, and Buffalo also have interest in the young forward. They're all in situations where they could use some help. New Jersey, of course, has a pretty young team, a lot of great young forwards there that he could possibly play with. The Sabres have a lot of flexibility as well in their organization, their lineup right now, and even like Pittsburgh, they're obviously looking at a situation where they might be making some moves to kind of shake things up here as well. I'm not sure that a forward, though, would be, absolute top of mind. It kind of depends on what happens with their blue line. Their blue line's been so banged up lately that you would think that maybe they would want to address that situation first. But before the blue line ran into all these injuries, it was rumored that the Penguins were interested to see if they could figure out some more forward depth, but they also don't have a GM right now as well, trying to replace Jim Rutherford. So I'm not sure that Pittsburgh's going to be doing much of anything for at least a little while until they get that sorted out and really determine the direction of the team moving forward. But, obviously a Virtanen trade is something that would not surprise me in the least right now. The teams mentioned, I do understand how they could be a good fit there. I'm just not entirely convinced that Debrusk would be the guy going back the other way from the Boston Bruins if they were to make that kind of deal. At the same time, I don't really question the sources here coming up with this idea, given the fact that he has been mentioned in rumors before. And I know some people aren't the biggest fans of Jimmy Murphy in Boston hockey now, but I will say this, they were dead on about Zdeno Chara all the way through. They were saying months before it actually became official that Chara wasn't going back to Boston, that the Bruins were not going to re-sign the defenseman, and that he was likely going to continue playing and it would be elsewhere. It's just a matter of determining where. So I do see where they have some credibility, at least with me. So we'll see what happens here. The Bruins could be showing interest, but again, not convinced it's a straight up one-for-one deal by any means. Now, the other trade we want to talk about here is between the Leafs and the Flames. Of course, we've talked about a couple of times that Toronto is one of the teams reportedly showing interest in Flames. Disgruntled forward, I guess we could say, Sam Bennett, who has requested a trade from Calgary. He's been in and out of the lineup, been scratched, but also had opportunity in the top line. And many feel that maybe he's been kind of showcased there to try to see what he can do. And he did have a big goal the other night as well to kind of entice teams to maybe, ramp up their trade offers. Now, of course, we talked about a potential trade between Calgary and Toronto just in the past couple of days. The rumor had it that there was a potential deal being discussed that would involve Travis Dermott and Pierre Engvall going to Calgary for Sam Bennett. Now, more information today from thefourthperiod.com and Dave Pagnotta indicates that that's what the Leafs would prefer to do, and that's kind of the offers that they have been rumored to have made to Calgary to acquire Sam Bennett. But apparently the Flames have more interest in Alex Kerfoot. They obviously would like to get a center iceman back. Bennett doesn't always play center. He does play wing as well, but still they're losing somebody who has the ability to play center, and they would prefer to fill that void with somebody who can. Obviously, they have lots of other players who can play the wing, so they're not as concerned about that. They would be more likely to want Kerfoot and something else. Now, if it's Kerfoot and something else, it's probably not Travis Dermott in that situation. It could be another forward, a depth forward. It could be a draft pick. It could be a prospect. It's difficult to say what that second piece would be, and it could be more pieces involved on the Calgary side too. It doesn't mean it would be a one-for-one or a one-for-two type of trade, but apparently that's what the Flames are wanting, and the Leafs right now do not seem to be willing to do that, which is why, even though there's been a lot of rumor and talk around a potential Flames-Leafs deal, that the Leafs are rejecting right now because that's what Calgary wants, and they don't want to do that. If the Flames come around and are willing to look at an Engvall-Dermott type of trade for Sam Bennett, that it is something we could see. But of course, as I mentioned before as well, I know Bennett likely would be a good fit with the Leafs in some sense, but at the same time, he's not going to get that bigger opportunity that he's really looking for from Calgary right now. He's not going to get into their top six, at least likely not on a consistent basis, given what else they have in that lineup. So he's going to end up being probably at best a third-line player, maybe, perhaps a fourth-line player. It kind of depends on where they see him. In Calgary, he's played third-line wing or fourth-line center, and for the most part, he's probably going to be at best the same thing in Toronto. And Toronto already has, a lot of players like Spezza, and they've got Boyd, and they got Barabanov, and they've got Nick Petan, and they obviously have Robertson, who's injured right now, coming back. Like, they have a lot of guys who can play in that role. Thornton's hurt, Simmons is hurt. So, yes, in the short term, I can see how he'd be a bigger addition, and he might even be able to get some top six opportunities in the short term too. But longer term, would he really be a great top six fit for Toronto? I don't see it myself. If they're willing to give up Dermott and Engvall for a guy who can play that gritty style on the third line, then that would be a good deal for Toronto. I just don't know that long term Sam Bennett is going to be really super happy. But, he's another guy, again, grew up in the Toronto area. Maybe that opportunity in Toronto, he would just love to be a Maple Leaf, and maybe he would accept that more likely than he would be on another team. I don't know. I can't speak for the guy, but like I said, another guy grew up in the Toronto area. That area produces a ton of hockey players, given how large the population is, and maybe it would work for him. I don't know, but that's why things are held up, and why the Leafs and Flames have not come to a deal, is they're certainly at odds over what the package would include to acquire Sam Bennett from Calgary. So let me know what you would do if you're Toronto. Would you be willing to include Alex Kerfoot in a Bennett trade? Or do you think they should stick to their guns here and only offer what they have been? And if Calgary won't come around, then no dice. Or do you even want Sam Bennett at all if you're a Leaf fan? I'd love to know your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.